welcome everyone to the fourth installment of the Beyond the Diagnosis webinar series. Joining us today is Ben Fulton, I'll let Ben introduce himself, but just a quick reminder that questions can be saved for the end. We will have a Q&A period. We've budgeted time for that. You can ask your questions using the Q&A feature, or you can type them in the chat, or if you'd prefer, you can raise your hand, and I'll allow you to unmute, and you can directly ask Ben your questions that way as well. So, Ben, I'll turn it over to you, and you can get started.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Canadian Council for the Blind Beyond the Diagnosis series. Today's topic, Understanding Your Rights, Finding Your Voice, and Creating Change, will take you on a journey from understanding a specific health diagnosis through navigating the healthcare system, patient self-advocacy, to systemic inclusion, institutional accessibility, and the use of assistive technology. Finally, ending with a discussion of the work I do in restorative justice and how it creates healthier and safer communities. Before I'd like to begin, I want to say that I am blind and I don't see much of anything at all. I have a little bit of light perception. There's no visual aspect to this presentation, and I'm not going to take the time to describe what I look like because it's not really important, and I find sometimes it's better to be left with my own imagination as to what the speaker sounds like or looks like. So I'd also like to acknowledge the land. I am delivering this from the city of Mississauga, which sits on the unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron of the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This land is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, which is a covenant that reminds us that the land has limited resources and we need to harvest as if all of us are sharing one spoon, not everybody digging in with their own spoon, taking as much as they can, because it is a fragile and delicate balance in this area. I am a lawyer practicing in the GTA, and I do work in restorative justice, which promotes healthier and safer communities. My ancestors are largely from Europe, countries such as Scotland, England, and Italy, and my mother's mother may have been native to North America, but the records are unclear. And what I would like to say is that I teach from a multicultural perspective that seeks to incorporate learnings from around the world. Today, we will be talking about the loss of vision and eyes that stop working. When I was about 5, 6 years old in grade 1, the teacher used to write all the letters of the alphabet on different colored pieces of construction paper. One letter for each piece of construction paper: red, blue, yellow, orange, green, purple. And then she'd jumble them up. So you couldn't just go A, B, C, D, E. You had to go B, X, Q, G, Z. The order was totally random. And then she would ask the students to say all the letters of the alphabet that they saw before them. And she noticed when I got to the purple construction paper, it took me an extra second. I'd slow down, I'd look a little bit closer, start to squint. And she recognized this as an eye problem. Black felt pen on purple construction does not add a lot of contrast. And that was the start of my eye problems. We were sent to the optometrist in Grand Prairie. Grand Prairie is a northern community, about 4 to 6 hours north of Edmonton, depending on how you drive. And there are not a lot of resources up there. The optometrist put these drops in my eyes that really stung quite a lot. he actually talked to my mom and said that they should send me for nerve testing because I wasn't fussing about it. I told the optometrist that the drops hurt, but not enough to make a fuss about it. But the optometrist explained to my mom that he'd seen grown adults scream, cry, and make more of a fuss than I was. Well, they took me to the doctor and my nerves were fine. I was just a trooper, little to know what was to come for me in store. It actually took 3 years of being on a wait list before we could get down to Edmonton to see a certified ophthalmologist and receive an official diagnosis. Even though the optometrist in Grand Prairie made a comment to my mom that he was pretty sure he knew what was going on with my eyes, he couldn't actually tell her because he lacked the certification. When we first drove down to Edmonton, it was exciting. A bright sunny day in the middle of the summer, and going to the city was always fun. There were so much more things to do there than there was back in Grand Prairie, a population of about 15,000 at the time. But what ensued over that weekend was not fun at all. It was scary. I was put in a dark room and more of those drops were administered. And then they started putting electrodes on my head, like the movie E.T. that I'd been watching recently. And I was thinking, what's wrong with me? There must be something seriously wrong. I wouldn't be going through all of this if there wasn't something really, really wrong. And they sent us home with a pamphlet. I don't remember exactly what the pamphlet said, the exact text that was used, but it might as well have said, "So you're going to go blind." The formal diagnosis was retinitis pigmentosa. And what hit home was the doctors telling me I would be blind before I was an adult, that I would never get to drive. And that was the saddest moment for me, really, because I wanted to do so much driving. I wanted to be like a taxi driver, know all the routes in the city and everywhere to go. I wanted to be a race car driver like Tom Cruise in Days of Thunder. And, I just thought driving was the coolest thing you could ever do. And when that was taken away from me, there was a lot of grief and despair that I had to cope with as a young child. And there were also things the medical profession got wrong. They told us at the time there was nothing diet or exercise could do. Eye exercises, they weren't helpful. Eating carrots really didn't make a difference. Well, my mom said, what have we got to lose? So I did exercises. I ate a carrot-rich diet full of lots of beta carotene, ate a lot of omega-3s. And where the doctors officially said I would lose my vision by the time I was 18, I didn't actually stop using a computer screen until I was 28 years old, about 10 years more than the doctors originally predicted. And now the tune has changed. They are saying diet makes a difference. They are saying exercise makes a difference. They are saying that general health will slow the progression of these diseases. And that's important to know. Over the next decade, as I grew into becoming an adult, the story of self-advocacy was really the story of my mom advocating. She had to fight through the school system to get me access to a computer. She knew that computers were the wave of the future and that my skill and proficiency would be a turning point in whether or not I would become a successful adult or if I would just scrape by with the minimum. She knew that in addition to having a computer, I needed training. Being in a remote community, there was really not a lot of training offered. I believe I only got 2 lessons of orientation and mobility training with my cane. As a result, I was largely self-taught. At the time I was growing up, they felt I didn't really need the training because I didn't need to use the white cane. I could get around without it, and I did. But then in my 20s, when I needed the cane as my vision began to deteriorate, I had to learn how to use it. I had to learn the appropriate gait and swing, how to prevent it from getting caught in chain link fences and other obstacles. I broke a few canes on my journey. It wasn't always fun, and there were many bruised shins and scraped knees. But I learned in the end how to use the cane, and I started using it more often as I needed to use it. But it was also a stark realization of coming to grips with my identity as a blind person. As I was growing up, I made an effort to not let people know that I was blind. In fact, I sometimes called it walking in the land of the seeing how long I could go without people knowing, having friends that I knew for years that had no idea I was slowly losing my vision, like one of those old televisions turning off in slow motion. It was called tunnel vision. And every year the tunnel got a little bit smaller until there was really nothing left but a blurry dot. I'm now at the point I can't count my fingers. I can tell if the sun's out, but I might even mistake a street light for the sun until I realize it's 11 o'clock at night. And unless you're in northern Alberta, where I grew up, that's not a common occurrence to have the sun up at 11. Though around the solstice, it does happen. So my mom advocated for me for all of those educational things that I needed, all of those meetings and taking me to the optometrist time and again. And the fight didn't stop there. As I went to university, I had to fight for accommodations, for class notes, for materials provided by professors. In some cases, I wasn't getting my course material for the courses I was taking until 3 or 4 months, or sorry, 2 or 3 months into a 4 month semester. There was more than one class where I got the material 4 weeks before the final exam. So I had to do a lot of cramming. And it really did affect my grades. In addition to that, all of the time spent needing to fight for those accommodations, to request the accommodations, to put together accommodation plans, was time taken away from my studies, times I could have otherwise spent reading the material, reviewing it, and committing it to memory for those very grueling tests. And after graduating, my transcripts were not the most competitive. And I had a very difficult time in attaining work. After 6 months of pounding pavement, I realized that I had actually more people asking me for representation at different courts and tribunals than I had law firms wanting to give me an interview. And this is where I decided to go into self-practice. I knew that the clients were satisfied with the representation that I was providing, and I knew my reputation was starting to build. So, with all of that confidence, I threw myself into starting benlaw.ca in January of 2020. Now, March of 2020 was the start of a pandemic that launched this country and many others into months of shutdown. All of the momentum that I'd built in January and February, representing clients and doing agency work, going to courts, that was all put on hold for half a year until it resumed in October. During that time, I put a lot into marketing and managing. I spent a lot of time on the website. I did what I could to promote myself, to engage in networking. I started making phone calls in the evenings, talking to people as I took my guide dog for her evening stroll. That really helped me combat the social isolation that was common during that era. And as we pulled out of the pandemic, I got more and more clients. Some of them were attracted to my commitment to systemic inclusion. My fight for systemic inclusion was both on behalf of myself and behalf of my clients. 2 weeks before being called to the bar, I was prevented from getting coffee at a Shell gas station because I had a guide dog. I was asked to leave the store, and when I told the clerk that I was legally allowed to be there, the clerk called the manager and told me that I had to leave anyway. When the police were called, I thought they would enforce the Human Rights Code, that they would uphold the charter. Instead, I was arrested for mischief, placed in handcuffs, taken outside, searched, and put in the back of a cruiser. I was there for at least 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. It is kind of hard to judge time in those situations. In the end, there were no charges laid. I filed a complaint, and after a couple of years of the bureaucratic processes involved in these kinds of complaints, I was able to achieve the settlement I wanted. The police and the store employees were all required to undergo further training, and systems were put in place to ensure that new people would get the training before it became an incident. But the fight for systemic inclusion didn't stop there. As a law student, I needed accommodations close to the university, and I experienced discrimination when I was looking for those accommodations. Many people didn't want to rent to me just because I was blind. The first landlord who did rent to me in first year made me sign a waiver saying I wouldn't sue him if I fell down the stairs or injured myself. In second year, I rented a place for 1 semester and was doing an internship for the second semester. The place I rented, I ended up only staying in for 2 months because the landlord there didn't want me around because I was blind. By the end of the 2 months, I did demonstrate to the landlord my competency, even when I helped him to fix a faucet in the basement that was broken, not because of anything I did, but just because of its age. In third year, again, the hunt for housing continued. And I had one landlord send me a text message saying that they would not rent to me because I was blind. And I thought there was the proof I needed to finally make a case. So I filed my complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal, and I found out that under the Human Rights Code of Ontario, landlords are allowed to discriminate if they share a kitchen or a bathroom. So I challenged that part of the Human Rights Code using the Charter of Rights and Freedom under Section 15. Under Section 15. Unfortunately, when it went to the Human Rights Tribunal, they found that it was not a charter violation, but we have appealed that decision to the divisional court, and we're still waiting for that decision. It has now been over 7 years since I graduated and have found other accommodations, but the fight to get equality in housing and to end the discrimination still continues. In my practice, I'm also confronted with institutional accessibility. I currently work as duty counsel in Ontario for 3 different jurisdictions. The software system that we use is fully accessible, though not always the most usable, which means I can access the information, but sometimes not as quickly as I would need to. And because of the very fast-paced environment, I work with a sighted guide who helps me get the material I need at the lightning speed that it is required. This means that institutional accessibility is not always just about software and technology solutions, but also involves a human element and can draw on human resources to meet the gaps where they're needed. Another organization I work with, the Criminal Lawyers Association, has issues with their website and their listserv. And unfortunately, I have become the unpaid accessibility tester. And I have brought this up at the various accessibility meetings, the accessibility committee meetings. And unfortunately, some organizations have feet of clay when it comes to change. That doesn't mean we should give up. It means we should try even harder. I enjoy the Criminal Lawyers Association for the most part, and I want to work with them to become even better. But sometimes those changes are slow. I lastly want to talk a little bit about the use of assistive technology before wrapping up the conversation with my work in restorative justice and how it leads to safer and healthier communities. When using any kind of assistive technology, it's important to consider the learning curve. I myself am a JAWS user. When I started using a screen reader, JAWS was the best screen reader out there, but it's actually a fairly expensive screen reader. It was purchased for me through the assistive device program here in Ontario, but not every province has programs. I mean, every province has some kind of program, but they're not all equal. So you'll have to research what programs exist in your province. But I want to say there is also NVDA, which is a free screen reading program that is fairly good. And also the Windows Eyes has become better and better and is now probably as good as JAWS if you know what you're doing. Again, the learning curve. I learned on JAWS, and it is difficult to learn a new system, especially when you're familiar with what you're doing. It took me over 2 years of working with JAWS to get as quick and proficient with it as I currently am. And it would take a similar commitment of time to get that proficient with another software screen reader. So consider what you want to invest in before you invest the time learning. The same could be said of the Apple or Android phone debate. When I first got an iPhone, Apple was the head of the accessibility department. But they've actually fallen behind in recent years, not as good and robust as they used to be. And Android has really caught up to the point now where I think if you're learning from the beginning, they might be fairly equivalent. So consider what system you want to use before you take the time to learn it. Also, other programs might be able to help you with things like Braille displays, as they are fairly expensive. And it's important to understand that learning Braille is beneficial, even though you might not use it every day. I mostly just use Braille for labeling, but it has allowed me to label my files and find them without relying on this other piece of technology, the pen friend, which is one last word I wanted to say on terms of the technology. Consider whether you want apps on your phone doing more for you or if you want more and more devices. The Trekker Breeze is an external device that gives you access to a stream reader and also very sophisticated GPS. In some ways, it is superior to what you can put on your phone, but it is another device to carry. And these devices take up space and need their own maintenance. So consider that when you're considering what you want to do. I started with Pen Friend, but made the switch to Braille because for me, it was easier. Everyone's going to have their own solution, but you really have to get out there and try what works. Lastly, I want to talk to you about the work that I do. Now that I have graduated and am practicing law, I work in restorative justice. And a lot of times when I talk to people about what restorative justice is, they don't even really know what it means. So we really focus on the word restorative. It's restoring survivors of crime and those who commit crime to better and more productive ways of operating. In the most tangible example I can provide, which is the founding case for Peace Builders, which is an organization that I work with, it involved a case of arson. A youth burnt down a hunting cabin, and his sentence was to rebuild the hunting cabin that he burnt down. And this was no small task. It took him months, the whole summer. He had to get the tools, the supplies. He had to get a line of credit to buy the material for the hunting cabin. The hunting cabin was on a lake. He had to arrange a boat to get the materials out there. He had to purchase fuel for the boat to get the tools out there. So this was huge. And in working at it, he restored not only the hunting cabin, but he restored the relationships with himself and the rest of the community. At this sentencing circle, he heard from his peers about how they didn't think what he did was cool and it didn't gain him any respect in their eyes. He heard from the person who owned the hunting cabin about how it was needed to get meat to feed his family over the winter. And he heard from the community about how they were still willing to work with him if he was willing to take accountability for his actions. Accountability is a big part of restorative justice. In many cases, survivors want the offenders to be held accountable more than anything. In some cases, it's just about being in a healing circle and hearing from the offender their own story and what steps they are taking. Survivors want to know that this situation is being addressed in a way that will prevent it from happening. So I sometimes refer to myself as a crime fighting advocate because my approach to fighting crime is to address the root causes and the problems. I sometimes also refer to myself as a holistic lawyer. And what is holistic lawyering? It involves looking at the situation of the individual, taking their housing needs into account, their employment needs into account, anger management issues, counseling, past trauma. In a recent report I was reading, it indicates that 47% of people who experience violence between the ages of 0 and 17, most of the incidents occurring between 12 and 17, will go on to commit an act of violence or become involved in the law themselves within 1 year. Now, that's not the majority, that's less than half, but 47% is way higher than the population in general. And we have to look at that link. We have to address that link, and we have to provide counseling and trauma-informed policies for people when they first experience this and later when offenders commit actions that are criminal. Restorative justice seeks to get away from the adversarial trial system that is largely punitive in approach and provide healthier, safer communities through giving people the skills and the resources they need to operate in more productive manners. So that's the work I do. That's more or less my life story. And if anyone has questions about any part of it, sometimes I noticed one of the other speakers mentioned that it's not our responsibility to educate every member of the public. I frequently get asked questions about my blindness in social situations where I've just had too much time telling my story and I don't want to say it again. And I explain to the person that all they really need to understand is that I'm blind. They don't need my diagnosis. They don't need to know what kind of colors I see. Just understand that I'm blind and move on. Because it can be exhausting to go into the detail that I've tried to provide today. But now's your chance. If you have any questions about my blindness, if you have any questions about assistive technology, if you yourself are a friend or a family member of someone dealing with vision loss, have recently received a diagnosis, I'm open to those questions. If you want to ask me any questions about restorative justice, the work I do, I also teach restorative justice and I provide consulting to businesses that are looking to implement restorative justice in their workplaces. And with that, I will open the floor.
I'm monitoring the Q&A and the chat, and I'm just here. Judith has a question here. Judith, you should be able to unmute now. You unmuted and then you muted again.
Unmute now?
Yep, now you're off mute.
Well, I just wanted to say a great big thank you and absolutely enjoyed, but was also just taken with your presentation. I haven't met you before. I am happy to know that you're doing this from Mississauga because my family grew up in a house in Mississauga, and I'm now in Toronto because my eyesight I can't drive or whatever. I had lost my eyesight later in life, but I just am so impressed with you, and just kudos. That's all I want to say. Okay, thank you.
Hey, thank you. It's very kind.
Ben, we do have a question in the chat. Amanda asks, what drew you to restorative justice?
Well, Amanda, thank you very much for asking. From an early age, growing up in the community I saw that there were issues with the law and the legal system as it was currently being practiced. That the punitive approach was resulting in reincarceration and higher crime rates. People would receive sentences and be released and reoffend. And it didn't seem like putting people in jail for really long periods of time for minor offenses was the right answer. Nor did it seem that this revolving door system was really a good approach. So when I learned that I couldn't become a taxi driver or a race car driver, I decided lawyering would be a really good profession. And I went to the University of Victoria studying sociology, seeing sociology as a vehicle for social mobility. And I really studied about crime and deviance, and I started learning more about restorative justice at the University of Victoria, attending a number of lectures there, and learning about rehabilitation and how to make a big impact on youth and the effectiveness of early intervention. So it just seemed to me to be a superior approach. And in terms of the results, in a pilot study done in Alberta involving the wood buffalo restorative justice, in a study of over 100 participants, only one person reoffended. So that's over a 99% success rate. Now, restorative justice doesn't work in every approach. It's not a panacea. But the thing is, the adversarial trial system doesn't work in every case and should not be used as a panacea. We need more tools in our toolkit. So in those cases where restorative justice does work, there's a lot of like prerequisites. It has to be survivor informed. There has to be an active survivor who's willing to participate. The offender has to be willing to take accountability, engage, and work towards a solution that restores the survivor. Only when all of those prerequisites are met can restorative justice go forward. And so what got me involved was learning how much of an impact it has on the community and how much impact the community has on it. The community is what shapes a restorative justice solution. It's the participants involved that decide what steps need to be taken and how to follow through on those steps. So it's a human approach, and I've always had a very human-centered approach. I was doing human rights law as soon as I could practice law, and I expanded that to these areas of criminal law because liberty is a fundamental human right. And ultimately, we need to be looking at those situations that people are in holistically to address housing, to address financial stability, to address mental stability, to address other health issues, and come up with a situation where people aren't engaged in desperate acts out of desperation.
Thank you, Ben. We also have a question here from Barbara. Barbara, you should be able to unmute now.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you.
Wonderful. I found your presentation very interesting from a number of perspectives, but I now have macular degeneration and am now legally blind. The iPad has been wonderful to be able to expand and see things, but I'm at the point where I have to use magnifying glass as well, and now that's starting to get a little fuzzy. So you mentioned several different programs or devices that could aid vision, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the various ones that I hadn't heard of.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, keep yourself unmuted. We can maybe have a bit of a discussion. I'm not sure what what you're already aware of. And to let you know, I was also diagnosed with macular degeneration. I got RP, macular degeneration, and even in my late 20s, they found cataract was starting to form. So I really got a doozy. A CCTV may be one of your best friends. Have you heard of these devices?
No, I haven't.
Okay, they're great. When I had low vision through my like early university years, I read a lot on a CCTV. It's basically like a large computer monitor, and then below it is a TV, like a camera. It means closed circuit TV, CCTV. And you're basically taking a picture of the text that you're putting on this tray that slides around, and you're blowing it up, and you can blow it up to the point where you can have one letter on the screen. It's hard to read if you need things blown up that large. What I found was really good for my condition is I could read a lot easier if there was white lettering on a black background.
Hmm.
So I could use the CCTV to invert the colors. And then it wasn't much about making the font bigger, just being able to read it because it was a different kind of a contrast. I became very photosensitive. I couldn't go outside without sunglasses. So staring at a screen that was mostly white was very difficult, whereas staring at a screen that was mostly black, and then what I was picking out was the bright white letters, that really helped. So I'd suggest a CCTV. They're they can be a little expensive. The prices probably come down a little bit, but that's something I think if you were in Ontario, the assistive device program would be able to help with.
Unfortunately, I'm in British Columbia.
Okay,
Um,
there are other programs in BC. When I was a student, I was in BC. I went to the University of Victoria, but then all of my funding came from like student funding sources that were only available to students.
hmm.
A bar magnifier is a really good, handy little tool that's fairly inexpensive and easy to use. And that just basically magnifies one line of text at a time. Then you can just kind of slide it down your page as you're reading.
Okay.
It does involve you kind of putting what you're reading flat on a table to be able to read it. So it doesn't work as good with like books that have creases. There are a lot of apps out there. Like, do you have an iPhone or an Android?
I have an Android phone.
Okay. So I do still have an iPhone. I'm not sure how many apps are over there on the Android. There are a lot. And actually there is a Android discussion group online. Um, I will see. Yeah, I will see if I can include a link to the Android discussion group in the material when the recording goes out.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, because they could really help you with the Android apps. But Be My Eyes, I think that might be on Android, or
Yes.
Seeing AI is one.
Okay.
Um, and Seeing AI was really good at reading short bits of text or labels. Like, so if you were in a store and you wanted to know like what flavor, it'd tell you if you were holding cream of mushroom soup or tomato soup.
Hmm.
Um, And then I recently got the Meta glasses. Those work with Android and iPhone, and they use their own AI, Meta AI. And it's really fascinating. It feels more like having a conversation. You can just ask what you're looking at, and it will describe the scene to you. And if there's like text, like a storefront, you can ask it to read the signage. So the Meta glasses were good. I think I mentioned the Trekker Breeze. That's a good one for reading and also GPS. Uh,
That's checkered breeze.
Trekker.
Oh, Trekker, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got the old the original Trekker Trekker Breeze. Now it's called the Stream Reading Trek or something like that. But I have the one before they had the before it was a stream reader and it was just the GPS. But it's pretty outdated now.
Okay. Part of my problem is that the letters appear to be jumbled. I don't see a straight line anymore.
Okay.
So that's why I need part of why I need a magnifier when using an expanded text, even on my iPad, because it straightens things out. I don't know why, but it does.
I think Zoom Text is another software I used to use when I had low vision.
Zoom Text, okay.
Yeah, and there might be some settings there that would help keep lines of text straight.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's been very helpful.
Yeah. And yeah, but best of luck.
Thank you. And also to you. You're continuing to do some wonderful work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. We have a question from someone who's anonymous. What surprised you most about being a lawyer that you didn't expect before entering the profession?
One of the things that really surprised me was the lack of civility in some of the opposing counsel. I actually don't practice civil law anymore because, well, that was one of the reasons. There were a few reasons. In criminal law, the Crown, actually, they really respect the duty to accommodate. And even if the accommodations aren't there, they will acknowledge the fact that they should be taking steps to make sure that I can read the material. Even when I was starting out in practice and didn't have the kind of access to human resources that I do now, they arranged an accommodation where video disclosure was sent to a third-party agency that then provided a audio description of what was in the video. So that was, a high level of accommodation that was provided by the Crown. On the civil side of things, I had opposing counsel telling me that they didn't need to convert their documents to anything that I could read. And they would send me documents that I couldn't access, and they just didn't want to accommodate me at all. And it was very frustrating. It was very challenging. And, I didn't appreciate having to go to court to ask the judge, to ask the lawyer to provide me material in a form that I could read. It was a lot of extra work on my part. And, it just shocked me that there were members of the profession that would treat a fellow member of the profession like that. And, also a lot of the discrimination, when looking for a job. Many people discriminated against me because of my vision. I even had one person tell me after I completed the job interview that he actually wasn't really planning on giving me a job in the first place. He just wanted me to come in so we could have a conversation. That was not a fun thing to be told, especially considering that, it took me over an hour to get to the interview, and giving myself enough time to not be late for the interview. I think I probably spent closer to 90 minutes. And then I had to, trudge my weary way back home, completely deflated that here was another job interview. And what's worse, I never even really had a chance in the first place. So those were some of the things I think that really surprised me, that I wouldn't have expected when I first got into law.
That's really disappointing. We do have a question from Richard. He has his hand raised here, so I'm just gonna allow him to unmute. Richard, you should be able to unmute now. Oh, now you're muted.
There we go. There we go. I actually, it was, yeah, anyhow. Thank you, Ben, for your presentation. Just a quick comment for the woman that was on earlier. If she's using Android, if you download Google Accessibility Suite, that'll have a magnifier for your apps, your phone screen, and the TalkBack screen reader as well, too. So if you haven't downloaded that, and it's on the Google Play Store as well. So that might help you. And I also switched my phone to dark mode, which is the uh, dark background with the icons and the positive instead of the white screen. But Ben, I wanted to ask you, um, does restorative justice get used often in the Indigenous communities? Because, like as you know, and as we talked about, Toronto, the Indigenous communities, the community interaction with the law is far outweighs the percentage of the population that they comprise of in Canada, that we comprise in Canada. And I'm just wondering if you've heard of any successful situations where restorative justice is being used, and because of the ongoing trauma with colonization and the residential schools, many Indigenous communities have a lot of reasons for getting on the wrong side of the law, like whether it's racism or just issues sort of arising from the ongoing intergenerational trauma. So I just wanted to know if you know what's happening if restorative justice gets used in those communities, and great work that you're doing as well.
Yes, Richard. Thank you for the question. Restorative justice certainly gets its roots. A lot of teachings coming from the Indigenous communities. Certainly, as the name Wood Buffalo Restorative Justice suggests, that is a lot of Indigenous participation there. The thing is, a lot of the work I do seeks to expand the use of restorative justice so that it is not just the purview of Indigenous clients. It is certainly relevant to those communities, and especially because of the residential schools and the intergenerational trauma that you mentioned. Certainly, the statistics that I was quoting earlier about being exposed to violence and then going on to become involved with the law is certainly at play in these cases of intergenerational trauma, where people have been taken away, have been abused, have been denied their own parents, and have been denied parenting skills. And unfortunately, a chilling statistic is that there are actually more Indigenous children in care right now than there were in residential schools at the height of residential schools. So we are still dealing with a lot of systemic and institutional racism that needs to be combated, and in situations that take accountability and give people the resources that they need. So we need a lot of restorative justice in those communities. The example that I cited about the arson, that was in fact from an Indigenous community, and Peace Builders as an organization does a lot of work with Indigenous youth. So it is certainly very prevalent in Indigenous communities. A lot of the learnings of restorative justice come from those communities. A lot of the practices come from those communities. It's just important that it doesn't stay there. I think these are teachings that have the ability to transcend and transform large aspects of our population and our culture. And I think until we start really incorporating this and using it more predominantly than the adversarial trial system, we're going to continue to have problems with over-incarceration, and we're going to continue to have these institutional problems. We can build more jails for more prisoners and more courts for more criminal cases, but the real remedy is to work with people in a way that produces productive members of society, not inmates, a way that reduces, people's desire and need to commit those crimes. So I've heard it said by an elder, this was, closer to colonialization, words to the effect that we have no jails and we don't need them. You have many jails and they still do not hold all of your criminals. So we need to really consider how we're dealing with justice and change our approach really from the get-go. So that's what I would have to say about Indigenous justice and restorative justice and the interplay between the two and a lot of the work that I do.
Great, thanks.
Thanks for your question, Richard. Ben, if you still have some time, we have a few other questions.
Yeah, I've got time and I'm willing to stay late if people want.
Okay, perfect. So Leslie has asked or has said, "Thank you, Ben. This is all very interesting. I like your thoughts about restorative justice. I think a lot of difficulties people face with the Human Rights Commission is the time it takes to go through the system and make a complaint. Do you feel this will change, or is it changing currently?"
I certainly hope it will change. Many people give up. After you make a complaint and it seems to go nowhere for 2, 3 years, how much hounding do you do? I actually kept the docket like I would with any of my other active files just to keep track of how much time was being spent. And let's just say it was well over 100 hours. That's a huge time commitment. So it has to be really important. And I think anybody who's brought a complaint to the Human Rights Tribunal, certainly brought that complaint thinking, yeah, this is really important. But as the months turn into years, people's priorities change. They have lives, they, want to go on with other things. They don't want to be spending over 100 hours. I believe it was Justice Rosalie Abella who said, people want their day in court, not their years. And so in terms of if it is changing, unfortunately, since the pandemic, I have seen wait times get longer and the situation has not improved. And I'm not sure how long it's going to be before they do improve. There are some cases that push their way through. But as I mentioned, my housing case was over 7 years ago. It took us over 4 years to get to the first tribunal decision. I think it was a year or two after, or sorry, to the first tribunal hearing. It was a year or two after the hearing that we actually got the decision. And then after the decision, we've appealed to the divisional court and we're still waiting on that. So, I hope that it improves. But in terms of any changes or improvements that I'm aware of, nothing on the horizon, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate to hear, but hopefully things eventually change. We have a question from Shelly Ann. Ben, thank you so much for explaining restorative justice. This is a very proactive approach. Could you please give us a few brief tips that those of us in the vision loss community can take when advocating for ourselves?
Remain dispassionate as much as possible. I remember once in my early days of using the white cane, I was crossing an intersection and someone started yelling at me, "You're not really blind, you're faking it, give it up." And, it suddenly brought to mind all of my fears. And one of the reasons I didn't use a cane for years was that I had a certain level of sight and I wondered how I would be received. But the reality is that I'd been run over and wanted to use the white cane to show to other drivers that I needed maybe a little help. I couldn't pay as much attention to them as they can pay attention to me. And so when crossing an intersection and being yelled at by a driver, I panicked. I crossed the intersection quickly and then extended my middle finger at them and told them that I was visually impaired in a very loud and angry voice, and then I listened to some loud and angry music for a couple of hours. There were a lot of emotions to process as, we come to terms with vision loss, because it is a loss and there is grief and there is anger. And especially that anger can be directed at, somebody who's challenging us about a specific thing. So it's important when self-advocating to take that emotion out of it. Give yourself time away from the situation to process those emotions and come at it when you can be more calm. More recently, I was walking to and from a store. There were a group of people standing in front of the store talking, and I walked around them and made my way to the store entrance. And then on my way back out, they were still there, and I walked around them again, and one of them challenged me and said, "Hey, you're not really blind." Now, I've gotten a lot better since my early 20s. And I turned around and said calmly, why do you think I can't see? And I explained how hurtful it was. And I actually showed them my phone that has the screen turned off. It's a screen curtain you can use to make your screen black and no one else can see what you're doing on your phone, but you can still hear it. And I showed them how I use my phone, and how it talks to me. And, we actually had a much better conversation. And I think that actually was a lot more impactful. And I think it left a much better impression. And I think going forward, that person is probably more likely to, consider whether or not somebody's faking it before yelling it out. One thing I wanted to talk about, I guess, as I was losing my vision was the spectrum of blindness. A lot of times people didn't understand blindness as a spectrum. For them, it's either you're blind or you're not. They didn't understand low vision. They didn't understand, well, I can barely see. Like, okay, I can read a street sign if I'm standing like 5 feet away from the street sign, whereas 20/20 vision says you'd be able to read that street sign from the end of the block, like 100 meters away. And also what people understand about 20/20 vision, because 20/20 is actually average. There are people with better than 20/20 vision out there. 20/20 is actually the average population. So tips in terms of self-advocacy, writing is a good one. Making yourself aware of the policy. Like, for instance, when I filed the complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal, I wasn't aware that discrimination was actually allowed. And so through making myself aware of the provisions, it allowed me to launch a challenge to that provision using the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So understanding the rules and the regulations, certainly legal advice. There are free legal clinics out there that can give you like some legal advice to help you narrowing the focus on like what your issues are. Understanding what the right to accommodate really entails, understanding what undue hardship means when somebody who doesn't want to provide an accommodation is trying to use the undue hardship angle to get out of providing that accommodation. And keep things in writing as much as you can. Like I said, I experienced a lot of discrimination when looking for housing, but on any of the instances, it was all just verbal, and I felt like, it wouldn't necessarily hold a lot of weight. It would be a whole lot of he said, she said. But when I had the text message, I felt like I really had the evidence I needed. So, in any kind of cases, where you're negotiating with an employer or in any situation, just if you can keep writing, like if it is an email thread, save that, make sure you have a backup. And if you can't actually get writing of the actual, like what the actual person wrote, just take your own notes and save them.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. We have I think this is a question. It might just be a comment. Fairman says, thank you so much for this informative talk. As a lawyer, the rules of justice, those are equal in all provinces. I think it's meant to be a question.
Okay, think I maybe get where he's getting at. So we have overarching federal legislation. So the Canadian Constitution, of which the Charter of Rights and Freedom is a part of our Constitution, applies in every province. Now, in addition to this, each province has their own human rights code. Now each province does have a human rights code. I know that much, but they're different in each province. So the provisions in the Ontario Human Rights Code are not the same as the Nova Scotia or New Brunswick Human Rights Code. And in fact, in one of the maritime provinces, it is actually against the law to advertise a unit if you are discriminating. So while they might allow a landlord sharing a kitchen or a bathroom the ability to discriminate the same way that we do in Ontario, they prohibit that person from advertising it. So this would have to be more of a word of mouth situation where they have a room, but they're going to be really picky about who they rent it to. Whereas in Ontario, and we've actually seen this, you can legally have a ad that advertises a room to rent in your place where you share a kitchen or bathroom, and you can actually legally say in your ad, no Indians allowed. And that's the provision that we're trying to change. Even if it was, changed to mirror the other province where you can't advertise it would, be a little better. We'd like to get rid of the provision altogether. Not every province has the same carve out, because the thing is, the Human Rights Code does provide equality in accommodations, but then it provides this exception. So if the landlord's sharing a kitchen or bathroom, they don't have to comply with the rest of the code. And that's something we were trying to get eliminated. But I hope that sort of answers your question in terms of how the human rights legislation works kind of across Canada.
Thanks, Ben. Fairman, if that wasn't sort of what you were asking, feel free to just type in the chat and or raise your hand, and I can allow you to unmute as well. I think we have one last question. Leslie says, you experienced many biases and stereotyping during university. Do you find restorative justice would help to remove these stereotypes for people living with low vision or blindness?
Yes, I certainly think there'd be a lot of potential there, especially when using restorative justice practices in institutions or workplace settings. Like I said, I provide consulting to businesses that want to use restorative justice in their workplaces. And so this would involve situations where an employee makes a hurtful comment, maybe a microaggression. I remember when I was a student at the Parkdale Clinic, the law clinic, working with other students, and there was a survey about our workload. And another comment, a colleague, a friend of mine, made some comment to the effect that he didn't think my workload was reflective, or that my experience was reflective of the other students. And it was not only hurtful, it was untrue. Because the thing is, it forced me to go and look at my own workload and compare notes, and I was carrying just the same number of files. I had recently closed a number of files, but when we looked at the overall caseload, the workload, I was toe to toe with any one of my peers. And there were times when we did intake, and I took over doing intake for my colleagues and ended up with more files. What I think he didn't understand is there were times when I needed breaks for eye strain, for fatigue, and I would take breaks if I needed to. I would just log out and I would take a walk around the block and give myself a bit of time to decompress and come back to work. What he didn't see was that, well, there were many times I had left a little early or more or less right at 5 when everyone was leaving. There were a lot of times when I stayed till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. He didn't realize the extra hours I was putting in when everyone else had gone home. He didn't see how much more work I had to do just to stay on the same level with my peers. So when someone makes a comment like that, having a healing circle where the members of the division can get together and the person with a disability can explain their situation and hear from the other person, and we can have a real conversation about why these comments are harmful, why it is hurtful, how it is hurtful, and work towards creating a workplace that actually promotes and supports people. And we see increases in productivity when we do this. When people are feeling supported and safe and healthy at work, they give more to their work and their employers get more out of them.
Thank you, Ben. That answers that question. And Fairman did confirm that you answered their question as well. So that's perfect. And the rest of the comments are just an overwhelming thank you and appreciation for your time and expertise today. And I don't believe there's any more questions. Do we have any other questions? Last call.
Okay, yeah, it's a little after 1. So yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. Certainly check out my website, benlaw.ca, and I've got a podcast that's going to be launched here in September discussing workplace safety, accountability, and harm. Yeah.
Ben, if you want to provide me with a link, I can send that when I send the recording of this session.
A link to that, and also a link to the Android discussion group.
Yes, the
I'll make sure
Android
to
discussion
go out with the
group.
recording notes. Yeah.
Beautiful. So thank you so much, Ben, for your time and your presentation this afternoon. I know I speak for everyone in saying that we all benefited greatly from your expertise. Like I said, a recording will be sent, and I'll include those links by the end of the week. For everyone in attendance, we look forward to hosting you again next week for our 5th installment of the Beyond the Diagnosis series. The next session is for Friday, August 7th at noon Eastern Time, and will be hosted by Dr. Arjmand. And yeah, thanks again, Ben. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to working with you again and hearing your podcast when it's released.
Yeah, certainly. Oh, yes, and I'm looking forward to the World Vision Day coming up on October 8th. So yeah,
Yes.
thanks again for having me.